It was a cool evening in London, and the Grand Royal Gala was the most talked about event in the city. The red carpet stretched out under bright lights, and photographers gathered to catch the best shots of the celebrities and dignitaries arriving. One by one, the air was filled with excitement and chatter as expensive cars stopped and famous faces stepped out, waving politely to the crowd. Among them, a quiet figure appeared, stepping carefully out of a car that didn't look nearly as flashy as the others. It was Keanu Reeves. He wasn't wearing anything extravagant. His black suit was simple but elegant, his hair a bit messy in a way that made him look natural and real. While many stars posed for cameras, Keanu simply smiled softly and gave a small wave before walking inside, not demanding attention. Inside the grand hall, chandeliers sparkled overhead and the floor shined like glass. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved carefully, balancing trays of drinks, and the guests mingled, their conversations filled with talk about art, fashion, and wealth. In one corner, a group of wealthy women watched the arrivals closely. Among them was Victoria, known for her expensive taste and sharp tongue. She noticed Keanu walking in and whispered to her friends, "Why is he even here? He looks so plain. This is not Hollywood." Her friends giggled quietly, casting sideways glances at Keanu as he passed. Victoria continued, "He's not even trying. Look at him, so out of place." Her words were meant to hurt, though she spoke them as if joking. She didn't care if people around her could hear. She liked attention and enjoyed the feeling of being admired by the elite around her. But Keanu didn't seem to notice, or maybe he chose not to react. He walked past them calmly, greeting a waiter politely and accepting a glass of water. He smiled at a nervous young staff member who seemed unsure of what to do next, giving the worker a kind nod that instantly put him at ease. Some of the guests near Victoria noticed this quiet kindness and felt a little uncomfortable with the way Victoria was behaving. But no one said anything. After all, Victoria's family was important, and many people didn't want to risk upsetting her. Keanu found a small table near the side of the hall and sat down, observing the evening quietly. He wasn't trying to show off. He wasn't surrounded by a crowd of fans or reporters. He simply sat with a calm presence, occasionally chatting kindly with the staff or giving a small smile to guests who met his eyes. Victoria, on the other hand, continued to whisper rude remarks about him to anyone who would listen. She seemed to enjoy putting him down, as if it made her feel more important. "Can you believe he didn't even bother with a proper entrance?" she said, loud enough that a few guests nearby could hear. But Keanu stayed composed, as if their words didn't reach him at all. As the evening went on, more guests began to notice how different Keanu was from the crowd. While many guests demanded attention, acted loud, and tried to impress others with stories about their riches, Keanu remained modest and kind, treating everyone the same, whether they were wealthy or working as waiters. A woman at a nearby table leaned toward her husband and whispered, "He seems like such a gentleman, doesn't he? So polite, nothing like what Victoria is saying." Her husband nodded quietly, noticing the growing contrast between Keanu's quiet grace and Victoria's loud gossip. Meanwhile, Victoria kept laughing with her friends, her voice sharp as she continued her jokes at Keanu's expense. But more and more people around her began exchanging glances, uncomfortable with her behavior. There was a growing feeling in the room. People could see who truly had grace and kindness, and it wasn't Victoria. Through it all, Keanu simply stayed seated, thanking the staff who brought drinks to his table, making brief but warm conversation with a shy young waiter, and offering a gentle smile to a nervous assistant who dropped a tray nearby. His small acts of kindness slowly caught the attention of people around the room, even if he didn't intend for anyone to notice. The evening was just beginning, but already the atmosphere was changing. While Victoria and her friends thought they were in control of the night's attention, The quiet respect Keanu showed to everyone around him was beginning to speak louder than any of Victoria's insults. And as the night continued, something unexpected was about to happen, something that would shift everyone's view of the quiet actor sitting alone near the corner. The grand hall continued to fill as more important guests arrived, but Victoria's focus remained on Keanu Reeves. Sitting comfortably at her table with her friends, she leaned in and whispered again, making sure others nearby could hear. "He really thinks he belongs here, doesn't he? Sitting there like he's one of us." Her friends laughed softly, feeding her ego. Keanu, sitting at his table near the side of the room, remained completely calm. His quiet smile never faded, even though it was clear Victoria's group was talking about him. Maybe he heard their words or maybe he didn't care. Either way, his behavior stayed the same, polite, peaceful, and respectful. The waiters moved carefully through the hall, offering drinks and small plates of food to the guests. Keanu thanked every single one who came near him. At one point, a young waiter seemed nervous as he served a tray close to Keanu's table. His hands shook slightly, and a glass nearly tipped over. Without hesitation, Keanu reached out gently and steadied the tray, giving the waiter a reassuring smile. The young man nodded gratefully, comforted by the kindness. Nearby, some guests noticed this simple gesture. A man in a dark suit turned to his wife and whispered, "That's real class right there. Look at how kind he is to everyone." His wife smiled, watching Keanu from a distance. Others began to notice too. Quiet conversations started around the room, and more guests found themselves glancing toward the actor who wasn't trying to impress anyone. But Victoria didn't stop. If anything, she grew louder. "You know," she said to her friends, "I heard he's not even that successful anymore. Maybe he's here just to feel important again." Her friends chuckled weakly this time, their laughter not as bold as before. Some of them were starting to feel uncomfortable, realizing that Victoria's comments were petty and mean-spirited. Victoria, however, enjoyed the attention. She continued, her voice full of mockery, "Maybe we should invite him over. Wouldn't that be fun? Imagine how awkward he'd be trying to fit in." Her words drifted into the air, and a few nearby guests frowned, clearly disapproving, but still hesitant to speak out loud. No one wanted to confront her directly. Keanu stayed in his seat, quietly sipping his water and observing the elegant crowd. He never interrupted anyone, never sought the spotlight. His eyes were kind as he nodded politely to a passing elderly guest, who smiled warmly back at him. His simple grace was hard to ignore now, and the mood in the room was slowly shifting. People who had once ignored him were now quietly admiring the way he carried himself. At one point, a small group of staff members gathered near the edge of the room to whisper among themselves. One of them said softly, "He's been so kind. All evening, always saying thank you. Not like some of the other guests here." The others nodded in agreement, grateful that someone like him treated them with respect. It was a small thing, but for them, it meant a lot. Back at her table, Victoria noticed that her friend's attention was drifting. She felt annoyed that they were no longer laughing as easily at her comments. "Why is everyone so quiet all of a sudden?" she asked, looking around. No one answered her directly, but their body language spoke volumes. A shift in atmosphere was becoming clear. Victoria's jokes no longer felt amusing. Instead, they felt shallow. Keanu's presence, without him even trying, was changing the evening. He didn't respond to insults, didn't try to defend himself or act superior. He simply remained kind, treating everyone equally. Some guests were now wondering why they hadn't noticed his quiet dignity before. Even a few of Victoria's closest friends began to glance toward Keanu's table, feeling curious about him in a new way. One of them whispered, "You know, I read somewhere that he's known for being really generous. He doesn't show it off though." Another nodded, replying softly, "Yes, he helps a lot of charities, but never talks about it." He's always been humble. Victoria overheard them and felt a small pang of irritation. She didn't like the way attention was drifting away from her. She straightened her posture, determined to keep control of the room, but deep down she sensed something was changing. People were beginning to admire the man she had mocked all evening. Meanwhile, Keanu continued to sit quietly, completely unaware of the growing admiration around him. Or maybe he was aware and just didn't care. He stayed true to himself, polite, calm, and kind, no matter what others said or thought. And soon, the night would take a surprising turn that would silence all whispers and make everyone rethink what it really meant to be important. The evening moved on, but Victoria's attention stayed on Keanu Reeves. Even though more important guests arrived and music played softly in the background, she kept making quiet remarks, hoping to get more laughs from her friends. But her friends were no longer laughing the same way. Some were starting to look away, while others nodded politely without smiling. Keanu sat peacefully at his small table. He didn't seem bothered at all. In fact, he looked completely at ease. He thanked another waiter who offered him a glass of water and gave a kind smile to a staff member who accidentally dropped a napkin near him. Without hesitation, Keanu leaned down and picked it up himself, handing it gently back to the embarrassed worker. His actions were so natural and genuine that a few people nearby couldn't help but watch him closely. One guest whispered quietly to his companion, "He's different, isn't he? Look at how he treats everyone. No arrogance, no show-off." His companion nodded, feeling the same way. Slowly, word began to spread around the room, not loudly, but through quiet glances and soft whispers. People noticed that Keanu, despite being a famous actor, didn't act like a celebrity at all. He was calm, patient, and kind. Meanwhile, Victoria tried harder to keep attention on herself. She raised her voice just a little more and said to her friends, "Maybe he's just pretending to be kind so people will like him. It's probably all fake, you know." But her words no longer had the same effect. Her friends barely responded, and some looked uncomfortable. The mood at her table was changing, even though she didn't want to admit it. Across the room, a small moment caught everyone's attention. An elderly man struggled to adjust his chair near Keanu's table. Before any staff member could rush over, Keanu calmly stood up and helped the gentleman without saying a word. He smiled warmly, making sure the man was comfortable, then quietly returned to his seat. It was a simple act, but it spoke volumes. Guests who saw this exchange felt a shift inside themselves. Many had come to the gala expecting glamour, loud laughter, and showy displays of wealth. But here was a man who showed genuine respect without expecting anything in return. Keanu didn't need the spotlight. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. And that quiet confidence made him stand out more than anything. Even some of the staff began to share their thoughts quietly among themselves. One young server whispered, "He's so polite. Always says thank you. Treats us like we matter." Another nodded and added, "Most guests here barely look at us. But he really sees us." The admiration was spreading. Even though Keanu remained completely unaware of it, Victoria noticed the change too, though she pretended not to care. She took another sip of her drink and crossed her arms, watching Keanu closely. Inside she felt uneasy. No matter how much she tried to put him down earlier, people were no longer laughing with her. Instead, they were watching him with growing respect as Keanu continued to sit quietly. Some guests found themselves drawn to him. They wondered what kind of person he really was, beyond the quiet smile and simple suit. There was something calming about his presence, something genuine and real, that felt different from the usual glamorous guests who often filled these events. The music softened and conversations slowed, but Keanu's small kind gestures left a strong impression on everyone who observed him. He hadn't said much, but his actions spoke louder than any words. He treated everyone with respect, no matter their position, from waiters to elderly guests, and that left people thinking. Victoria, still watching, felt a small pang of jealousy. She couldn't understand why this quiet man, who said almost nothing all evening, was suddenly the center of attention without even trying. She tried to convince herself that people would forget soon and return to admiring her. But deep down, she could feel the difference in the air. And then, just as the evening seemed to settle into a quiet rhythm, something happened that would change everything. The large double doors at the entrance of the grand hall slowly opened, and all eyes turned. A gentle ripple of surprise and excitement spread across the room. The whispers grew louder as people realized who had just arrived. Keanu Reeves, who had sat unnoticed for most of the evening, was about to become the focus of everyone's attention in a completely unexpected way. The evening was far from over, and the next moment would silence even Victoria herself. As soon as the large doors opened, the entire hall fell into a respectful silence. All conversations stopped, and everyone turned to see who was arriving. So late, then a familiar face appeared. It was Prince William. His calm and warm presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. The staff straightened their posture, and the guests began to whisper in surprise and excitement. Victoria froze in place. Her eyes widened as she quickly fixed her hair and adjusted her dress. "Prince William is here," she whispered, trying to sound casual but clearly desperate to appear graceful and important now that royalty had arrived. Her friends straightened too, but their eyes were not only on the prince, they were also watching what he would do next. But what happened next shocked everyone. Prince William didn't stop to greet the usual wealthy donors first. He didn't walk over to Victoria's table or the tables where the most powerful business leaders sat. Instead, he walked straight across the room, smiling kindly, and headed directly for the corner where Keanu Reeves was sitting quietly. Victoria's mouth opened slightly in shock as she watched the prince move past her without even a glance. Her friends fell completely silent. No one expected this. Prince William reached Keanu's table, and before anyone could speak, he warmly extended his hand and said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear, "Keanu, it's so good to see you again. Thank you for coming tonight." Keanu stood and shook the prince's hand, returning the smile with a quiet, humble expression. His calm nature hadn't changed at all, even in this surprising moment. Guests around them could feel the shift in energy. Suddenly, everyone was paying attention to Keanu, but not because of Victoria's whispers. Now the prince himself had shown that Keanu mattered. Then something even more surprising happened. Prince William gently placed a hand on Keanu's shoulder and said, "I must thank you personally for everything you've done for veterans and their families. Your quiet support and generosity over the years have made such a difference." The entire room fell into a respectful silence again. Even those who didn't know about Keanu's charitable work looked at him now with newfound respect. The prince's words carried weight. This wasn't just a casual thank you. This was real praise from someone admired by many. Victoria sat frozen. Her earlier jokes now felt foolish and embarrassing. She could feel the eyes of other guests on her, but no one was laughing anymore. No one seemed interested in her jokes now that the prince himself had shown admiration for the very man she had mocked. Keanu remained graceful and humble. He didn't boast or act proud. He simply nodded respectfully to the prince and replied, in a soft voice, "Thank you, sir. It's a privilege to help in any way I can." His sincerity was clear. He truly meant what he said, and his kindness wasn't for show. The prince smiled again and added, "You are an example to us all, Keanu. Your kindness is appreciated far beyond what many here realize." Then, with one last friendly nod, the prince turned and addressed the entire room. "Please, let us all remember that tonight we celebrate not just wealth and power, but true character, kindness, humility, and generosity." A warm round of applause filled the hall. Guests clapped genuinely, many looking directly at Keanu as they did so. Even the staff at the edges of the room clapped quietly, grateful that someone had publicly recognized a man who treated them with respect all evening. Victoria felt completely exposed. The same people who laughed at her cruel jokes earlier were now looking at her differently. Some avoided her gaze entirely. She sank into her chair, unsure of what to do next. But Keanu, as always, stayed humble. He didn't use this moment to look at Victoria or to embarrass her. Instead, he simply sat back down quietly, thanking a waiter who refilled his glass of water, just as he had done before. His behavior hadn't changed at all, even now that he was suddenly the center of attention. The mood of the gala had transformed completely. All those earlier whispers and judgments about Keanu had disappeared. Now the guests admired him, not for being a movie star, but for the way he had carried himself with grace, kindness, and quiet dignity. Victoria sat still, realizing that true respect couldn't be demanded or faked. It had to be earned, and Keanu had earned it without even trying. And for the first time that evening, she remained quiet, unable to think of anything clever to say. After the applause slowly faded, the room felt different. The guests seemed more thoughtful now. Many of them glanced at Keanu Reeves with new respect, while others looked down quietly, reflecting on how they had judged him earlier. Even the waiters moved with more confidence, proud that someone who had treated them kindly was now being honored publicly. Prince William stayed near Keanu for a few moments longer, speaking with him in a friendly and relaxed way. Some guests nearby tried to listen in, curious about what they were saying, but Keanu and the prince kept their conversation quiet and sincere. There was no show, no need for loud laughter or attention. Their respect for each other was clear. Victoria, sitting just a few tables away, felt trapped in her own thoughts. The very man she had mocked was now being praised by royalty in front of everyone. Her earlier words echoed in her mind, and for the first time that evening, she felt embarrassed. The confidence she carried all night had slowly disappeared. Her friends stayed unusually quiet too, no longer laughing or whispering with her like before. As Prince William moved on to greet other guests, Keanu remained seated at his table. But now, people who had ignored him earlier approached him one by one. A well-dressed older man came up first, offering a handshake and saying, "Mr. Reeves, I didn't know you did so much for veterans. Truly impressive." Keanu smiled gently and shook his hand, thanking him softly. Another guest followed, saying kindly, "It's refreshing to see someone so humble at these events. You're a real gentleman." Keanu replied with the same calm and warmth as before, showing no pride or arrogance, just genuine kindness. Even as more people gathered around him, he didn't change. He still thanked every staff member who passed by, still greeted everyone with patience and respect. Victoria watched all of this happen, feeling invisible now. No one was looking at her anymore. Her friends, once eager to follow her lead, were quiet and distant, avoiding her gaze. She tried to act unaffected, sipping her drink slowly, but inside she felt uneasy. The admiration she had craved all night was now focused on Keanu, and he hadn't even tried. Across the hall, guests began sharing stories about Keanu's acts of kindness. "Did you know he's donated secretly to children's hospitals for years?" one woman whispered to another. "I heard he rides public transportation and talks kindly to strangers," said another guest quietly. The more people talked, the more they admired him. Even the staff joined in the quiet conversations. A young waiter whispered to a colleague, "He helped me when I nearly dropped a tray earlier. No one else even noticed, but he did." Another nodded, adding, "He says thank you every time. He's genuine." Victoria heard these whispers too. She couldn't avoid them. She realized how shallow her earlier comments now sounded compared to the genuine respect filling the room for Keanu. Her jokes had not only failed, but had left her feeling exposed. Meanwhile, Keanu continued to behave exactly as he had from the Beginning. He didn't let the sudden attention change his mood or actions. He smiled kindly at those who approached but didn't seek their praise. He spoke softly, asked about their families, thanked them for their time, and continued to treat every person, rich or poor, with equal respect. At one point, a staff member dropped a spoon near Keanu's table. Before the staff member could even bend down to pick it up, Keanu leaned forward and retrieved it, handing it back gently. The staff member smiled with genuine appreciation and quietly said, "Thank you, sir." Keanu nodded and replied, "It's no trouble at all." That simple gesture did not go unnoticed. Guests nearby exchanged glances, realizing that Keanu's kindness wasn't an act for the evening, it was who he was. He didn't need attention or admiration to do the right thing. He simply lived that way. As the evening moved forward, Victoria sat quietly in her chair, feeling completely different from how she had felt at the beginning of the night. Her voice, once loud and confident, was now silent. The room that had laughed with her earlier was now filled with people who admired Keanu, not because he had impressed them with wealth or charm, but because he had shown true kindness and humility when it mattered most. And all around her, guests continued to approach Keanu, eager to meet the man who had stayed humble, gentle, and respectful even when he was mocked. The respect he earned tonight would not be forgotten, and neither would the way he had carried himself through it all. The evening at the Royal Gala continued, but everything felt different now. The quiet respect for Keanu Reeves had spread through the entire room. Guests who had ignored him before were now curious, eager to speak with him, or at least observe how he carried himself with such grace. Conversations about his kindness and generosity replaced shallow gossip and loud laughter. Even the staff, who usually moved carefully to avoid being noticed, felt comfortable near him. Keanu remained just as calm and humble as before. He didn't change his behavior, even though so many eyes were now on him. He still smiled gently at the waiters and quietly thanked them each time they served a drink or cleared a plate. The admiration around him was genuine, but he didn't seem to seek it or need it. He simply stayed the same. Victoria, sitting at her table, watched all of this happen. Inside, she felt embarrassed and uncomfortable, but on the outside she tried to act as if none of it mattered to her. She kept her smile polite and sipped from her glass, pretending to be engaged in conversation with her friends, but they weren't really talking to her anymore. The warmth and laughter that had once surrounded her had disappeared. Her friends, too, felt the change in the room. Some looked down quietly, thinking about how they had laughed at her jokes earlier. Others glanced toward Keanu, feeling ashamed that they had judged him too quickly. No one said anything out loud, but the silence between them spoke clearly. Then, Victoria made a decision. She stood up slowly, straightened her dress, and walked carefully toward Keanu's table. Her steps were small, her confidence not as strong as it had been earlier in the night. She reached his table and paused for a moment, unsure of what to say. Keanu looked up at her and smiled gently, just as he had smiled at everyone else that evening. His kindness didn't fade, even for someone who had mocked him earlier. Victoria cleared her throat softly and said, "Mr. Reeves, I just wanted to say, I didn't realize how much you've done for so many good causes. I admire that." Her voice sounded different now, less sharp, more hesitant. The guests nearby fell silent, waiting to see how Keanu would respond. Some of them expected him to ignore her or offer a cold reply, considering how she had spoken about him earlier. But Keanu stayed true to himself. He nodded politely and said, "Thank you. I believe kindness is something we should all practice quietly. It's not about being noticed. It's about doing what feels right." His words were soft but meaningful, and they seemed to touch everyone who heard them. Victoria felt a strange mix of emotions, relief that he hadn't embarrassed her, but also regret that her behavior had made her look small and petty. She nodded quickly, unable to think of anything else to say, and quietly returned to her table. The guests around her avoided her gaze. The laughter that had once followed her every comment was gone now. No one seemed interested in her sharp remarks anymore. Instead, they were still focused on Keanu, not as a celebrity, but as a person who showed genuine grace. Throughout the rest of the evening, Keanu stayed humble and kind. Even though more guests approached him now to shake his hand or offer compliments, he remained calm and modest. He didn't boast or act superior. He simply thanked them sincerely, listened carefully to what they said, and continued treating everyone, no matter their status, with equal respect. At one point, an older guest approached Keanu and said, softly, "You've taught us all a lesson tonight without saying much at all. Thank you for that." Keanu smiled gently in return and replied, "I think we all have the ability to be kind. It's not hard, we just have to choose it." His response felt simple, but it meant so much in that moment. The guests around him nodded thoughtfully, realizing that true class had nothing to do with money, fame, or power. It had everything to do with how one treated others, especially those who couldn't offer anything in return. Victoria sat quietly at her table, watching all of this unfold. She felt invisible now, her earlier confidence replaced by quiet reflection. She realized that admiration couldn't be demanded or forced. It had to be earned, not with fancy clothes or clever words, but through kindness, respect, and humility. Keanu had shown everyone that night what it meant to have true character, without ever raising his voice or seeking attention. And as the evening slowly came to an end, it was clear that no one would forget the lesson they had learned simply by watching him. As the evening began to wind down, a calm and respectful atmosphere filled the grand hall. The loud chatter and laughter from earlier in the night had faded. Now most guests were quietly enjoying their last drinks and desserts, their conversations softer, more thoughtful. Many of them couldn't stop thinking about how differently this night had unfolded. What had started as a glamorous party full of shallow gossip had become an unexpected lesson in humility and kindness, all because of Keanu Reeves. Keanu sat calmly at his table, as he had done all evening, still offering polite smiles to the staff, still quietly thanking every person who approached him. He didn't seem interested in the attention he was getting, and yet his quiet nature made everyone admire him even more. Guests who earlier might have ignored him now felt grateful just to shake his hand or share a few words. In one corner of the room, Victoria remained seated, her posture more still and serious than before. She no longer tried to draw attention to herself. The friends who had once laughed easily at her comments were no longer gathered closely around her. Some sat quietly at nearby tables, while others simply listened to the soft music playing in the background. Victoria's usual confidence felt distant now, replaced by quiet reflection. She kept glancing toward Keanu, not with the same arrogance as before, but with a quiet curiosity, as if trying to understand what it was that made him so respected. Then, Prince William stood again and gently raised his glass for one final toast. Before the night ended, his voice was warm but clear as he spoke to the entire room. "Tonight," he said, "we have been reminded that true character isn't shown by how much noise we make or how much attention we gather. It's shown in the small, quiet moments, in kindness, respect, and humility." His words made the room fall completely silent. All eyes turned toward Keanu, but Keanu didn't react with pride or arrogance. He simply nodded politely, as if accepting the prince's words not for himself, but as a reminder for everyone. The prince smiled gently and added, "It's easy to seek attention. It's harder, and far more meaningful, to treat every person around you with respect, no matter their position. Let us all take that lesson with us tonight." A second round of applause filled the hall, this time softer but deeply genuine. Even the staff at the edges of the room smiled quietly, touched by the prince's words and the way Keanu had carried himself all night. Keanu stayed seated, Still calm, still gentle. Even with the prince's public praise, he didn't suddenly rise or try to stand in the spotlight. He stayed true to himself, quietly thanking a passing waiter who cleared his table, and offering a small smile to a nearby guest who nodded in appreciation. The guests began to gather their things, slowly, preparing to leave. But before she left, one older woman approached Keanu and said softly, "You may not have said much tonight, but your actions have spoken louder than any speech." Keanu smiled warmly and replied, "Thank you. I think we can all make kindness a part of our lives, no matter where we are." His words were simple, but they stayed with her, and with many others. As the guests began to leave the hall, their conversations were different now. They didn't talk about fashion or who had the most expensive jewelry. Instead, they spoke about respect, kindness, and how refreshing it was to meet someone like Keanu, who treated everyone as equals. Victoria left quietly, no longer the center of attention. She felt a strange mix of regret and understanding. She knew now that the admiration she once craved couldn't be forced. Respect had to be earned, and Keanu had shown exactly how to earn it, not through words, but through his actions all night. Even as the hall emptied and the staff began cleaning up, they continued to speak warmly about Keanu. A young staff member smiled and whispered, "That was a real gentleman. The way he treated us, it made a difference." By the time Keanu left, the night had completely transformed. He didn't walk out surrounded by cameras or reporters. He simply thanked the staff one last time, gave a polite nod to the remaining guests, and left quietly, the same way he had arrived. But long after he was gone, his presence stayed with everyone who had been there. The lesson he left behind was clear and simple. True kindness doesn't need attention. It shines brightest when no one expects it. And for everyone at the gala that night, including Victoria, this would be a story they would remember for a very long time.